Welcome back inside Brunch. I am sorry. We had to do a whole lot of adjustment this morning, and my next guest, who is a media and entertainment expert and consultant director for COTT, and also a broadcaster, we were just chuckling at how you plan one thing and you have to change them around to her disadvantage this morning, time-wise. Josanne Leonard, thank you so much for taking the time to come out this morning. Good morning to you.
Thank you very much, Rennie. Naughty.
Intellectual property, the cost to creativity, intellectual property, paying lip service and having true respect for it. What is intellectual property? It's easy, it's bandied about, it sounds like a nice buzzword, but what does it really mean? Let's talk about COTT in that context and briefly explain what is the mandate of the Copyright Organization of Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, so full disclosure, I'm not here representing COTT. I'm a consultant director on the board of COTT, but I'm really very happy to share some thoughts and some ideas. Generally on what is involved with copyright and intellectual property and its importance to Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Caribbean, taking off from where Nadine was talking, which is why I wanted to jump in so much, because we're talking so much about traditional sectors and traditional areas of economic growth and development, and really neglecting to more than, I would say, in very sort of nice speak, talk about the value of creativity and intellectual property industries. So COTT as an example is a collection management organization, which is a fancy word for saying that it exists to represent authors and composers and their rights, and people who use their music. So a society like COTT would be involved in licensing music, in collecting royalties, in dealing with broadcasters like yourself in terms of use of music, not just only for Trinidad and Tobago or for local music, meaning Trinidad and Tobago, but the entire region. And by way of a very well developed reciprocal, another big word, really not too big, but arrangements with other societies around the world to represent their rights for use of works here in Trinidad and Tobago. But I don't want, because I have the experience, I'm not going to allow you to hold me to a COTT conversation alone this morning, simply because I think that a lot of our people in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean do not understand. Everybody has, or a lot of people have an attitude, well, they could play music and they could use music as they wish. Now, I mean, copyright just does not exist to protect music. It's, and hence the reason intellectual property.
Yes, all encompassing, yes.
Yeah, it's a whole range of industries, some of which are core, some of which are direct, some of which are indirect. So that our Copyright Act would speak to not just works of music, etc., but literary works, works of mass, etc., etc. People need to become more aware of what it is and how important copyright is in protecting creators and authors. In the case of what we started to talk about, COTT, as a collection management organization, that's music. But there are a whole range of creative works and disciplines that are protected by copyright. And I think what we have to get as a nation and as a region, we were having a almost, bless you, an almost trite conversation about why people feel they should pay for music or for the use of music. Yes. If you go to buy bread, you can also say, well, I'm doing you a favor, by eating your bread or switching on your dial or buying a garment. Someone creates and should be able to earn, and the people who use it should pay for the use of it. And we've had a difficult time. We've had peaks and troughs in Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean with people understanding the role of copyright and why it is that our people who create, because this is what they do, this is their craft, this is their work, this is their output, and they should be compensated in line with any other profession or any other discipline.
There is the argument that a lot of folks some folks cannot make the link, and it's clearly there, that by not doing the copyright thing, which is to pay copyright, we are in fact stifling all aspects of art in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, it's interesting because the reason why I was biting at the bit when you were speaking with Nadine was she was talking about all sectors. She was talking about the challenges that Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean would be facing in terms of the old industrial models that we have advanced post-independence. The copyright industries are growth industries. And, I came here this morning prepared to blah, blah, blah about what it means to the US and what it means to the UK and to developed societies. Because they do the work, they do the data, they have the programs, they have, even though they have their struggles, they do the things that are required, at least to the competitive advantage of their creators. Now, if I use the COTT example or a CMO example like COTT, we represent our local members as an example. And we have to administer based on what we collect. So we have, these administration rates and so which we have to keep down by international standards. But a lot of our effort is expended in actually collecting on behalf of authors and composers, rights holders who exist in other markets. So the ASCAPs and the BMIs and the PRSs, et cetera, of the world. That has a very direct bearing, Rennie, on our use and propagation of local content. And it comes to our belief system. So it's across the board. But I'm making the connection now with the fact that you take a country like Jamaica, and we're talking about Trinidad and Tobago in this context, but Jamaica exponentially has created so much impact in terms of sport historically, which is intellectual property, and music in terms of reggae music. But it collects very little. There's very little. Bolt by himself, in terms of dollars and cents, was worth.
Industry. Yes.
He is exactly, but the value added to the countries is not seen because our intellectual property regimes, the things that our governments and our the people like the Intellectual Property Office and those agencies are responsible for. We need to do a lot more in terms of that framework.
Which is precisely why I started the conversation and sought to make clear to our listeners the function of COTT, because I think it is a monitoring agency and collection agency like that we would need to look at all the other aspects of intellectual property. I mean, do we have any organization looking at the other aspects of intellectual property?
Well, there's the Reprographic Society, which represents people in the publishing sector. But I would say, like a lot of these agencies, because we would depend on membership, we would depend on our, for example, COTT's core business would be to go out and collect money on behalf of its members. Well, that sounds simple enough. But when you have to persuade every single user of music, music in the public domain as well as music in the private domain. Because if you are, and it can get very, very technical, but if you're going to have a big Bram in your house and you have 300 people or whatever it is, you're basically going to be using someone else's intellectual property to entertain, and by law, you should have permission.
So I'm curious on that. Just
well, that's the law.
I understand. Yeah. I'm curious about that aspect of the law. How many people in a gathering constitute a group or whoever is applying the music making a
well,
payment?
I don't want to speak on matters that I'm not that fully
I was just
versed.
curious. Okay.
No. But I mean, it's information that can be easily had. I mean, and we have a law that speaks to it. But I mean, that's the harder part. But when you think about every bar, every recreation club, every hairdressing salon, every nail technician place, every office, I mean, you and I were having the conversation. If we had a day or two without music, without the sound of music, not even in one of your jingles here on the radio station, it would be a completely different world. But it's not just for entertainment. Entertainment is a business. And the people who create should be compensated. And we have to get over ourselves in this country and in this region that creators, whether they are creators of music, of film, of animation, of fashion, of architecture, whatever it is, well, there are disciplines that are higher up the value chain, because if you're an architect, you have a certain kind of status. But unless we value creativity and we value the importance of creativity and the role that it can play in creating jobs, in creating wealth, in creating national identity, all of those things converge into a great perfect storm that's right for our small countries in the region. So that when Nadine is talking about how challenged Jamaica is and its heavy reliance on remittances, which we know is probably even as big as or bigger than tourism, and it's the same way in Guyana.
Second only to Haiti, quite frankly.
Haiti and in the rest of the English-speaking Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago facing its own challenges now in terms of declining revenues from the oil and gas sector. What is it that we're going to do? Now, I did say, like, for example, let me just use a statistic, and I don't like using them simply because I don't think they resonate with us here. But the U.S. exported $177 billion. Is it billion or million? I'm going to find the billion in 2015. 177 billion through movies, videos, music, all of those what we would call core copyright industries. They exported that. When you think about our region, how much of that are we importing by way of our consumption? Like the conversation we were having. How much are we importing by way of our consumption in food so that we have a $3 billion food import bill in Trinidad and Tobago, while we have an agricultural sector that is languishing, while we have all the foods that are as good as or parallel. And I'm just using that as a good example. Because when I looked at the last budget and I looked under the Ministry of Trade and I looked to see what was the allocation, it was less than 2% or 2% or something like that.
You see, that's one of the reasons. This is one of the reasons why I kept using, and I even asked you the question about how many people in a venue will constitute who must pay COTT, because there are many people. As you and I agreed, you cannot legislate this. You must have.
It is legislated.
But legislation is not going to bring you the answer. Yeah. Awareness is what's going to do that. Yeah. And I think a lot of people are not, in fact, doing what they probably would like to do if they understood where and when they are supposed to pay.
So you're coming to the question of public education
yes,
and
exactly.
public awareness. And I don't really want to embarrass my colleagues at COTT or embarrass myself, because there is a whole sophisticated, well-oiled, articulated system of licensing and tariffs. And so we have a licensing department, we have a distribution department. All of these things exist. And COTT is the grand dam of copyright collection in the region, because it was the first society that was started in 1985 when Diana Derrick, who is still with us and still as an honorary director on the board of COTT, worked for PRS and started copyright in the country. And you would know, because those were your heydays on the radio. Yeah?
I remember.
And so a lot of good work has been done, but I think that we have allowed a lot to fall off the table. And sometimes one feels as if one is starting all over again, because you have a whole new generation or generations, except, of course, that the fancy term being that they're the digital natives. They're the ones who are now dealing with technology, so that the analog is still with us, but we're now dealing with all forms of online music, distribution, content aggregation, all those kinds of things.
And that's why the education aspect has to be so important, because there's no way you can keep up the monitoring and or enforcement side of this if people understand that they are, in fact, assisting the art in its ascent to better sounds, better music, better designs, better this, better that. By making their payments, then they will do that.
Yeah.
I still think that education campaign is, at the end of the day, the most important thing to be done now, because I shudder to think that we must do enforcement to collect what people know is something they enjoy, and it really does not cost too much of them to pay for it.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it's I think it's a hearts and minds kind of thing. The law is there, and the law is to be enforced, and there's some big offenders of the law. I mean, big companies that you think should know better. And a lot of them are, and quite a few of them are affiliated to international companies where these things are not taken lightly in their jurisdictions, like in the US. So you take a little organization like COTT with 3,000 plus members who don't pay an awful lot of money, because, evidently the use of local music has a direct relationship and bearing on what COTT earns in terms of its collections in Trinidad and Tobago, and of course its obligations to its sister societies in the Caribbean, like COSCAP in Barbados and BISCAP and JCAP, etc., and then of course all the big nations on the outside. The interesting thing that has come up, and I'm sure it has happened in previous incarnations of COTT, is that you would know, Rennie, being in the media and in the entertainment sector, that we never really, I mean, for all intents and purposes, we had heydays, but we didn't have the classic recording industry model here in the Caribbean. Maybe a little more in Jamaica, although we had record labels and so. Our music was performed largely to aid performance. You know, all the guys in Calypso and so used to go to New York with Charlie and those guys, Charlie's and those guys. And people had records to promote, to get into the gigs and to get radio to listen to them. I mean, you were one of the few, I mean, in our era. God, I'm dating us, aren't I?
I'm gonna let you go on your own. You're out there on your own.
Okay. Where, you know, you would look at a record, somebody breaks a record and they bring it in and you would talk about it and you talk to the artists and you know who were the musicians and the arrangers. A lot of the cats, that's our real 70s too. A lot
You're
of
out there on your own.
No, but it's, you know, these things are coming back. They're vintage. But, you know, a lot of it is just instant, a lot of lack of knowledge people don't know. But we've had many incarnations and talks about use of local content. And of course now we've gone to the free market model, which I always poo-poo. And the reason why I poo-poo it is because I say you talk about free market now, but these societies that talk about free market have done a lot to protect their own internal development all across the board.
Even the development of the art form itself,
Correct.
I feel, is stifled by every Trinbagonian, everybody listening, who would use material and not pay for it, because the point we made of these guys writing their work, angling everything towards a season, can easily move into a year-round situation if they were in fact receiving something for music that's played outside of the season. Now, they don't have to write their music just to get a performance. They can make something that would happen throughout the year and will bring them money throughout the year. If we have this sensitivity and this understanding of how we are assisting the art form to develop, as against repressing it by not, in fact, going about.
And there's a big role for radio as well, and for media, because we need, you know, it's like BBC One and other stations that break new music, that give artists an opportunity, and not have it seasonal, as you said. But having said that, I can tell you, gospel, there's so many genres of music. There's a whole, if you want to call it, underground, as they like to say, with rock and fusion music, and people, artists and creators are finding their ways through the internet. But we don't control these portals, the Spotifys and the Vivos and the YouTubes and all of these mechanisms that exist in the online world. None of it we've created, and so now we have to interface with all of it. But there's an important thing to talk about in relation to not just the art form. Music and copyright is big business. For these countries, it's big business. And I mean, I just looked at the figures for the US. In 2016, their production of copyright industries was $2.097 billion or 2.1 trillion. I can't even think about $1 million somebody earning money here outside of a big show in Carnival. But the thing about what would be one of our core constituents at say, COTT, would be how many West Indian type carnivals there are around the world now, where our people have gone and they've assimilated and they've supplanted themselves. Our guys, our women, men and women start here, our artists start here. People come to Trinidad, for example, as Carnival, as a flagship. And this is the jump-off point for all of the carnivals around the world, as you know. The big ones being Notting Hill, Caribana, blah, blah, blah. The new one with Marshall and they in Hollywood, all over Europe. There are reggae festivals and there are music festivals where our artists, Jamaican artists I know, work almost year-round, a lot of them. So we have to be considering now that we are held to all of these obligations, all of these big treaties that our government signed, and so that we are part of the world the world ecosystem, and we have to sign to these Berne conventions and trips and all of these things that the ordinary person really doesn't concern themselves about. But we are held to these obligations. In a world of fair trade, we should be able to collect. This is where our people are performing. This is really where they are earning. So the little radio stations and the online platforms and what have you, we now have to become more aggressive, a lot more assertive in representing the interests of the music of the Caribbean. And I'm just using music because I said it applies across the creative sector.
Yeah, because a whole lot of intellectual property exploitation is done at carnival time.
Yeah. And then you have venues and all of these things. So, you know, because I remember one year there was a heated discussion with PRS about their black box and how much money was in there that was not being allocated because they couldn't track who it belonged to, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a long, heated debate, and I know that Eddie Grant got involved, and he was saying, if I'm one of the biggest in terms of catalog in the region and I'm not earning, what are you going to leave for
somebody else?
For the little people coming behind, you know what I mean? So I think now that our conversation is on many levels. One, yes, we need education. We need to love ourselves. We need to know that when we buy from the lady around the corner, and we buy local, that we are supporting our own development and we are ensuring a future for our artists, not just for the art form, which is the cultural sovereign issue. We are now trading in business. Music and the copyright industries are all big business, and they present real opportunities for us in the region because of our output. We've never done anything with it in any serious way. So that the next budget, hopefully, because successive governments don't seem to get it, would have a serious allocation for the development of the creative sector. The Ministry of Culture and Arts, or whatever it is now, because it always changes, has a role in terms of protecting heritage and those things. But where it meets the market, it becomes commerce. That's when it becomes creative industries. And these copyright industries are being used by even developed countries to transform their ability to earn, to create employment, and to also propagate their brands. You know, so we know the brands that are coming out of the US. We know the brands that are coming out of Europe. We know the brands that are coming out of the UK. Yeah. So I hope that this is a discussion that we could continue. I mean, this was very spontaneous, but, you know.
Well, we will indeed take the time to do that. The voice you've been hearing is that of media consultant, entertainment expert, and consultant director of COTT, Josanne Leonard. I just feel that these conversations do one thing. When I spoke with you about this initially, the thing you said, which is true, Rennie, we have the legislation on the books, but legislation is not doing it. We need to have people understand how they contribute towards the uplift of all aspects of our culture. And in this time of talking diversification, we need to get our culture, our intellectual property protected, the money come in to take our culture to another level, and then we can really start making money for it. I believe that this discussion is part of the education thrust we have to do, and I think this is the best way to start telling Trinidadians, Trinbagonians, every aspect of the intellectual property that you see that's exploited, that is not given its due, is a way of stepping the country one step further.
Correct.
Backward.
Correct. I mean, you've said it very, very succinctly, and thank you so much for this little window
Josie,
for us to start the conversation again, yeah?
We will have it again. Thank you so much, Josanne Leonard, for being here. I also want to thank Afro Raymond for being here this morning. My thanks to Nadine Spence in Jamaica at 55, the head of JTAM, and the president of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union, Ansel Roger. Thank you so much for being here. Attorney Farid Schoon also joining us, talking about detention and the inhumane conditions we have there. Big brunch this morning. Now I can go rest. I thank you all so much. Thank you all so much for joining us.